Every year, NFL teams make mistakes in the draft or draft a player higher than what they should have, and a couple of years later, a team that selected a few picks after them winds up with a much better NFL player. Whether it was choosing Baker Mayfield over Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, or Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, the point is it happens every single year. Maybe not to this magnitude, of course, but it happens, and in today's video, we're going to discuss the possibility of a couple of draft picks over the last few years that could have changed an NFL franchise. And to be clear, these are not going to be the low-hanging fruits that you immediately think of, like the Mahomes and Trubisky one in 2017, or even the aforementioned Reagor and Jefferson picks. These are going to be ones you may not have realized happened, or may not immediately think of, but with it being the offseason, I thought this would be a fun video to look back on and discuss, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing the Bills drafting defensive tackle Ed Oliver. Ed was drafted 9th overall back in 2019, and while he hasn't been a bad player, his production certainly does not merit the number 9 overall pick. And in 4 years, Ed has 151 tackles, 42 quarterback hits, and 14.5 sacks, which again aren't bad from the defensive tackle position, but it's not up to the level of his fellow 2019 draftees. And the 2019 draft class was surprisingly loaded with defensive tackles, including Quinnen Williams, Dexter Lawrence, and Jeffrey Simmons, and Christian Wilkins too. And the pick we are going to focus on here is, what if the Bills selected Jeffrey Simmons over Ed Oliver? And this is very valid because Simmons was viewed as a top 5 to 7 prospect in the 2019 draft process before tearing his ACL a couple of months before the draft. Teams knew he would miss about half of his rookie season, and he ended up playing 9 games in 2019. And the reason we bring this up is there's been times where the Bills certainly need the extra beef in the trenches, and Simmons would certainly help them out in a big way. And I was not a huge fan of taking Oliver over Simmons at the time, even with the injury, because the defensive tackle position is not a position where you draft a guy number, hell, even 3 overall like Quinnen Williams, and expect him to dominate right from the start and basically say, take over. It takes guys a couple of years, and with that in mind, I thought getting a player of Simmons' caliber at number 9 overall, even with the injury, was something that was in Buffalo's best interest. And there's been games where Simmons has flat out taken over at the NFL level, and sure, Ed's had his fair share of good games, but not to the level Jeffrey has. And you wonder if they had Jeffrey on their team rather than Ed for the infamous 2021 playoff game against the Chiefs, the 13 seconds game. Does Jeffrey get to Patrick Mahomes in time to either knock him down or make him extend the play further to take more time off the clock, which was obviously crucial at that point in the game, given there were only 13 seconds, or somehow, someway, make life more difficult for Kansas City, considering that was the divisional round of the playoffs, and in that same weekend, Simmons had 3 sacks against Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and he wrecked that game for Cincinnati. Now, thanks to losing the turnover battle and not being able to put up 20 points in a home playoff game, the Titans were eliminated, but it was obviously not due to Simmons. And this isn't me saying if the Bills draft Simmons they have a Super Bowl, because you never know how these games would have played out, but what I will say is imagine heading into 2023, or even last year for that matter, with opposing offenses knowing they have to game plan around stopping Jeffrey Simmons, Von Miller, and the emerging Greg Rousseau. This one move would have made Buffalo even more dangerous than they already are, and instead of paying Ed Oliver $17 million per year for the next 4 years, they could be paying a 2-time All-Pro. And we are going to go way around Lake Erie here to discuss the Detroit Lions and their selection of running back DeAndre Swift. Swift is now a member of the Philadelphia Eagles, and DeAndre never broke out in the Motor City the way they once expected him to. He wasn't a bad player for the Lions, as he totaled nearly 3,000 yards from scrimmage in 3 years, along with 25 total touchdowns, but was expected to produce more as a former second-round pick. And there was a player on the clock the Lions could have selected in Colts running back Jonathan Taylor, and if a healthy JT ran behind the Lions' offensive line, well, we would have seen similar results from JT that we saw in 2021. In a year he ran for over 1,800 yards and had 18 rushing touchdowns. And unlike Buffalo, who's been competing heavily in the AFC for a couple of years now, Detroit hasn't made the playoffs since 2016, and would one selection of Jonathan Taylor change that? Probably not, but if they had JT in an offense with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, and now Sam Laporta, well, offensive coordinator Ben Johnson would cause opposing defenses even more problems than he already does. And if Jonathan Taylor was healthy for all of 2022, then there is a chance the Lions would have made the playoffs last year, and if he were on the team, well, I already think they're going to make the playoffs this year, but having Taylor would only further that belief. And having Jonathan on their team would make everyone's life easier. Detroit had a great season in 2022 offensively, as Jared Goff was efficient, as he was on his way to throwing 29 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions, and Jamal Williams was on his way to rushing for 1,066 yards and 17 touchdowns before signing with the Saints in free agency. One big thing to remember with Jamal Williams is he averaged 4.1 yards per carry, which would be a career low for Taylor. So imagine him in that offense in what's already insanely difficult to defend, and basically saying to a defensive coordinator heading into every game, pick one offensive weapon to try and slow down. This would only be enhanced when Jamison Williams comes back due to defenses having to play a too high safety look out of respect to Williams' speed. Saying a running back would make a Super Bowl titles difference is very rich, and I'm not saying that, but JT as a member of the Lions would be a perfect fit. And with a conference of teams like the Eagles and 49ers, who are both very difficult teams to play because of their dominant run games, having one of the best backs in the league behind an ass-kicking offensive line, along with a player in Jamison Williams you always have to account for, would make the Lions' offense damn near unstoppable. And from one NFC North team to another, we go to discuss the Vikings and something that may have happened had they not signed quarterback Kirk Cousins. This one goes back several years, and a lot of other things would have had to have happened in order for this, but what if in the 2018 NFL Draft, instead of the Vikings selecting corner Mike Hughes from Central Florida at number 30, they draft a quarterback from Louisville by the name of Lamar Jackson. Lamar was, of course, selected 2 picks later by the Baltimore Ravens, but how these franchises would have played out over the last 5 years certainly would have been interesting, because there's a tremendous amount of questions for the Ravens and what they would have done at the quarterback position, and ultimately everything that ensued. How long does Joe Flacco stay a Raven? Do they keep Flacco through 2019 while drafting a quarterback that year like Drew Lock to try and develop him? I don't think this team would have ever been bad enough to get a Tua or Justin Herbert and finish with a bottom 5 or 6 record in the league to give them the opportunity. Flacco was already starting to decline in 2017, and ultimately Lamar took over midway through 2018, and the rest you could say is history. This is something I truly wonder what would have happened, and for Minnesota, how would both Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen's careers have played out during these years? How many more or less wins would the team have had? Because Lamar had to go through his own little stretch of an adjustment period at the NFL level, and the only year that both Thielen and Diggs went for over 1,000 yards together was in 2018, which would have been Lamar's rookie year, and that was in a year where Kirk Cousins threw for nearly 4,300 yards, which is something Lamar Jackson has never come close to throwing for in a single season. Both of these teams' rosters would have been constructed very differently over the last 5 years, and by the way, this isn't a trade of Kirk going to the Ravens and Lamar going to the Vikings. Minnesota needed a quarterback after the 2017 season, in which they went 13-3 and were led by Case Keenum. They replaced Case with Kirk, but could have opted to trade up for a quarterback, or in this case, stayed put and drafted Lamar. the Vikings' offensive line has been a weakness since Kirk Cousins has been a Viking, whether it was Mike Remmers getting his lunch taken or even Ed Ingram this past year. But how would Lamar, a very mobile quarterback, have countered the inefficiencies this offensive line has had over the past half-decade? I do think the Vikings would have won a few more games here and there, but since Kirk has been a Viking, they've won a singular playoff game. That total, in theory, probably would have been doubled going from 1 to 2, but would Lamar have been enough of a difference to lead this team in Philly this past year, or San Francisco in any of the other years to get to the Super Bowl? I don't think so, and from the Ravens' standpoint, the butterfly effect from this would have been substantial because truly, who knows what route they would have taken. Next up is a fun one for football fans to imagine, or not fun if you're a fan of an opposing AFC team, but in this scenario we're going back to the 2019 NFL Draft and giving the Chiefs DK Metcalf instead of the player they drafted, which was fellow wide receiver Mecole Hardman. During the 2019 summer and even heading into the 2020 season, Mecole was a fun player to project because of the element he brought to the table, which of course was speed. There was a lot of discussion that basically boiled down to these couple of things. 1. Tyreek Hill is already a weapon and a guy teams game plan against. 2. Travis Kelce is in the midst of a run of 1,000-yard seasons that is still going today, by the way, and we have to figure out how to stop him. And 3, now we're getting another speedster while dealing with the other 2, so how the hell are we supposed to stop all 3 of these guys, along with having, Patrick Mahomes as the team's quarterback? That was more or less the discussion around Mecole, and unfortunately Hardman never panned out the way the Chiefs thought he would. But in the first 4 seasons of his career, DK Metcalf has 2 1,000-yard years and has 2 seasons with double-digit touchdowns. And throwing him in an offense with Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce could have resulted in another Super Bowl title for this franchise. And to be clear, I'm talking about the 2021 season, in which they lost to the Bengals in the AFC Championship game, and had DK been on the Chiefs, they may have won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. And out of any of the players in today's video being discussed, I do think DK in this scenario would have the highest impact in terms of the postseason success with these franchises, mainly with the 2021 AFC Championship game. This was a game Kansas City lost 27-24, and a game they very easily could have won. And from a playstyle standpoint, DK is a one-of-one receiver because there's not a lot of human beings on the planet, not just in football, that are over 6'3" with a near 7-foot wingspan that can run a 4.33 40. This is a pick that I wish happened for several reasons, and I do wonder how many discussions the Chiefs had about drafting DK. Because throwing in even a rookie DK on the field with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce in a year where the Chiefs would go on to win the Super Bowl would be absolute hell for any opposing coach. If you try to take away the deep ball, then Kelce would eat underneath all game, which he kind of already does. And in terms of pairing quarterbacks with receivers, I don't know if there's one I'd like to see more than Mahomes and Metcalf, aside from ones we've already seen, like Burrow and Chase, and even Mahomes and Hill for 4 years. DK in a Chiefs uniform, though, would give the rest of the league nightmares. And only about 28% of people watching are subscribed, which has been rising, by the way, so shout out you guys. But if you are enjoying, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Each only take a second to do and make a massive difference, and it's also very much appreciated. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.